Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everyone who's been able to join us in the event this afternoon. As you've heard, I'm Jim MacDonald. It's my delight to be Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of Strathclyde, a part of which is our excellent Strathclyde Business School, and many thanks to them for putting today's event together. On behalf of the entire university, I'm delighted that we're holding now the third event in what is the second series of our innovative Leading Forward programme, delivered in collaboration with the Royal Bank of Scotland and NatWest Group. It's particularly my great pleasure to welcome Robin Watson CBE, and a particularly big congratulations to you, Robin, for the receipt of that CBE in recognition of your fantastic professional achievements. And Robin, of course, as you know, is CEO of the Wood Group, and he'll shortly be in conversation with our host, the equally highly accomplished and fantastically professional Dr. Lena Wilson. His topic this afternoon is Leading Forward, Future Ready Now, and he'll be focusing on how to build resilience and agility into corporate strategy in order to deal with the impact of a changing zeitgeist and emerging trends such as the climate change agenda, the impact of globalisation, as well as unexpected shifts, not least of which what we're all experiencing just now in COVID-19. I'm delighted to say that Robin, in fact, is a graduate of Strathclyde in the Strathclyde Business School, having received his MBA. He's also been a recent recipient of one of our Stellar Awards just last year. This is the Strathclyde Awards for those in executive leadership. Robin is also an engineer, having studied engineering at Heriot-Watt University, so he's managed to get 2 excellent degrees in 2 good universities under his belt. I was delighted when Robin got his CBE, and that was in recognition of his services to British engineering industry and international trade. And again, Robin, many congratulations on that recognition. Of course, the University of Strathclyde is moving into its 225th year, and similar to the Royal Bank of Scotland partners, in that we were established in the 18th century, a time of challenge during the Scottish Enlightenment. I think both organisations thrive and strive to replicate that same driving ambition of the time. And with all of that sharing of the history leads both NatWest and Strathclyde to be purpose-led organisations. And it's in that spirit that we're running the Leading Forward series, with not just Robin today, but other speakers in the months ahead. And I recommend that you keep an eye out for the forthcoming events. So without further ado, I'll now pass you on to Lena Wilson CBE, Non-Executive Director of NatWest Group, and indeed a visiting professor at the University of Strathclyde, who will be hosting today's session. Lena, Robin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. I was just saying to Robin earlier that it's nice to have an hour or so to take us off of the other events that are happening today. It's a nail-biting day for the world, no matter which side you're on. So, Jim, thank you very much for that introduction, and I will just add my congratulations to Robin for that well-received honour, an accolade for you and your family. As Jim says, this is our 3rd event this year. We went digital, responding to the situation, and we've been just blown away by the response to that. I think over 500 of you are joining us today, and for those of you who have not joined, welcome to the series. We held 4 physical events last year, and we've had a whole array of fantastic speakers that have provoked a lot of thought. And that's the point of this. It's to get thinking and discussion going, to lift us out of the day-to-day and to pass on some wisdom from terrific leaders. Last month, we had Alison Rose, CEO of the NatWest Group. And for me, it's fantastic to have the Royal Bank of Scotland supporting this, and being so associated with the organisation. And like Robin, I'm alumni of the business school at the university and a visiting professor there. So Robin is really going to talk about how we get future ready now. And I know that a lot of businesses are tuning in today and watching, and I know that you'll get a lot of insight from Robin. My job is then to just manage as much participation as we can. I've got a bit of a mission control on either side of me, and I'll be receiving the questions that you type in. We got quite a lot of questions in advance, and we'll also try and get some participation in terms of people asking their questions live. And I know Robin is up for that. So I'm really looking forward to it. Robin, thank you very much for making time in what was a hugely busy schedule, and I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Lena. Thanks, Jim. I hope I can live up to the billing. It's a real pleasure to be joining with both of you today, and it really is always great to be back in my old alma mater at Strathclyde. In terms of framing the discussion, and considering leading forward, I'm going to focus this discussion just around how to anticipate the demands of a changing world and its impact on how we live and work, maximising the opportunity from emergent social and economic megatrends, building resilience and agility to the heart of corporate strategy, and of course, how to deal with the unexpected, as we're all experiencing today in the form of COVID-19. So in short, it really is about how to be ready for the future, right now. Perhaps in framing the context around all of this, I would offer a hallmark, of my own leadership, which has really been centred on curiosity and agility. And that breaks down into, as I see it, three key component parts, which I see as fundamental to the proposition of leading forward. Firstly, it is actually building a durable and differentiated business. It's also about being a resilient and adaptable leader and leadership teams within that business, and of course being sustainable, how we operate in the ways that we impact people, the broader the environment and the world that we live in. So for me, it's as much a personal as professional responsibility, but it is that philosophy that's led me to transform our business and create Wood in the form that you see, today. For those of you that might not know us, Wood is a global engineering and consulting company. We operate across a wide range of sectors in energy and the built environment. From our headquarters in Aberdeen, we generate around $9 billion in revenue with about 45,000 people across 60 countries. In recent years and through our current strategic cycle to the end of 2019, we've doubled the size of the company. We've reduced our reliance on upstream oil and gas as an industry by 2/3, and we've broadened our footprint, our end market sector portfolio, and the reach of our professional capability. So we're continually evolving, and I really fundamentally believe that we must continually evolve to ensure we're not only well positioned today, but fit, ready and relevant for the substantial challenges of tomorrow. And we call this future ready now. To do this, we've spent a lot of time considering what we call the megatrends, which you'll recognise as some of the biggest generational changes in the world today. And we think on them certainly as energy transition, the drive towards more sustainable infrastructure, and the fourth industrial revolution driven by technology and digitisation, and in fact its impact on both future skills and new ways for us to be working. I've always taken a methodical, strategic approach to leading the business, and maybe it's the engineer in me as much as the business side, I suspect. But it was here actually during my MBA at Strathclyde that I first heard about scenario planning. And it really has been a significant feature in my strategic outlook ever since. And quite simply, I really was blown away by the power of it. And I'm going back now 25 years. And I've continued to use it continually on my own business journey. So it was this scenario planning methodology that we turned to in analysing these megatrends. In fact, we actually re-engaged with Strathclyde, and we solicited the help of Professor George Wright to support us in doing this. And George was a real blast from the past. The last I'd seen him was probably 20 years prior. We dragged him out of retirement, and he was really hugely helpful in helping us go through our scenario planning process. We dovetailed this in with our strategic review of our performance, our portfolio, and our end markets. And in identifying opportunities to create profitable growth, we explored, how best to leverage our strength. We followed this work up with a diagnostic review of our current capability and reach, mapping that against future opportunity, and we positioned all of that across the spectrum of what we considered were the potential outcome scenarios. So with that kind of background and framing in mind, let me just talk to you a little about each of the mega trends in turn, and you know, what we're doing in response to them at Wood. I'll start with energy transition. So whatever happens during and through the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, world population growth, the changing face of economies and urbanization, they are at odds, and they were at odds before the pandemic, with the pressing need to reduce our carbon footprint. You know, and one of the challenges that we have, a significant challenge, is squaring that circle. If we look at population growth, it took 10,000 years from the establishment of agriculture for the world's population to reach 1 billion. However, a mere 130 years later, 2 billion of us inhabited this, you know, small planet. Our population has actually doubled since 1970, and there could be as many as 9 billion people living on Earth by 2050. However, to meet the terms of the Paris Agreement, carbon emissions must be reduced by more than 40% over this same period. Now, that's a target world leaders will no doubt be debating further here, actually in Glasgow at COP26, 27, you know, next November. But all of this amounts, you know, inevitably, and I mean really quite obviously, to a significant challenge. So in my view, there is quite rightly an unstoppable momentum to reduce carbon emissions and create a sustainable energy ecosystem. It's a very human challenge, but it is technically solvable. But it's important to recognise in taking that journey on that it is an energy transition. And by that, I mean it's about the supply, the storage, the distribution, and the consumption of energy. And they're all inextricably linked. You know, energy storage and distribution challenges are not insignificant, and there is no easy solution to resolve them. I also feel quite strongly that any debate that pitches good solutions against bad solutions, you know, often in the current zeitgeist, they can be misleadingly simplistic, and actually on occasion can really be at odds with technology and science. So we do need to be cautious about that. We also need to be cautious about moving rather than reducing our carbon footprint. And it's important that we recognise there are interim steps to be taken to provide secure, reliable, alternative energy across the world. So we are all witnessing the current culture across the globe in relation to carbon reduction. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to state we're almost certainly living in the last age of a fossil fuel driven economy. And this is something that we at Wood have been preparing for some time. And it's fundamental within the range of scenario outcomes that we've modelled and continually refer ourselves to. From the optimisation of decarbonisation of existing portfolios to unlocking growth in renewables and lower carbon sources of supply, we're highly active in engineering solutions for a net zero future. By design, and thanks to our strategic planning, as our competitors consider the opportunities facing them, we're already delivering with our clients in the growth markets of tomorrow. You know, we're very proud that we've now worked on over 700 wind projects. These projects generate cumulatively 120 gigawatts of wind power, which is about 20% of the total global installed wind capacity. We've installed over 5 million solar panels in the last decade and a half. We've been the lead engineer or consultant in over 150 carbon capture and storage studies, and we've designed, built and commissioned 120 hydrogen units, and at the forefront of some of the most innovative blue and green hydrogen projects in the world. So we're hugely, hugely proud of that, and that positions us really well in terms of positioning the company through the energy transition. The second mega trend that's worth some discussion around would be sustainable infrastructure. At the start of the last century, the start of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, about 17% of the world's population lived in urban environments or cities. By 2050, it'll be around 70%, 70. In the developed economies of the world, this puts a significant strain on infrastructure, which in many cases is at least 100 years old. I had a laugh to myself actually, because I was looking at the usual map of Edinburgh, and the new town in Edinburgh, this is the new town, is 200 years old. So that's only in Scotland would we come up with that title for it. But in truth, the infrastructure that we have in many developed world economy cities is that 150 plus years old. In the developing world, we see a continuing need to build at pace, helping to manage population growth and satisfying the rising demand for energy. So we do need to ensure that the cities of the future are built from different materials, are more efficient and effective in the developments of the past, more resilient to severe weather shocks and future climate changes, and that will continue to evolve. This is first and foremost an engineering challenge. And you'll not be surprised, therefore, to hear that we've adapted our business to capitalise on the opportunity that presents for us. Through acquisition and subsequent organic growth, the range and scope of our services has been broadened to meet the needs that this gives us. We've actually now got 4 decades of experience in providing innovative, sustainable built and natural environment consultancy projects, and perhaps surprising to many, our current built environment consultancy within Wood, that business is actually larger than the Wood Group North Sea business was at its peak. That's how significant a shift we've put in place across the company in the last 5 years. The third mega trend is around digitisation and its effect on the future skills agenda. So between the 18th and 21st centuries, there were 3 significant industrial revolutions, doing much to improve living standards and life expectancy, but each of them impacting to varying degrees our natural environment and climate. And we're now in the midst of the 4th digital revolution, and it's a one which is disrupting society and the economy through both its pace and scale. So it's a bit different, perhaps, you could argue, than the previous 3. Given the power of technology at our fingertips and in our pockets, can you believe it took over 100 years to take the cable off the telephone? You know, it was invented, it was 100 years, and we just made the cable longer because it was plugged into the wall. But by the time we got the cell phone, and even that sounds ancient, language to use, by the time we got the cell phone, it took less than 20 years to put what is essentially a personal computer into our pocket. 100 years to remove the cable, 20 years to put a PC in your pocket. It just doesn't feel that's the natural flow of things, but it does give us a view on just how innovative this last 20 to 30 years has been. It took 40 years for 50 million people to have access to a radio, but less than a year for the same number to be logged on to Twitter. And if you think that's remarkable, it took little more than a month before 50 million of us had played Angry Birds. That is an incredible statistic in itself. In the 1980s, we had 2 terabytes of internet connectivity, 2 trillion bytes. By the early 2020s, we'll have 2 yottabytes, 2 trillion bytes. That is a trillion-fold increase in that last 35-year period. And in many ways, the most staggering statistic of all, the one that I find the most staggering of all, 90% of the data that exists in the world has been generated in the past 2 years. We all have a view as to how useful it is, but 90% of the data in the world has been generated in the past 2 years. So the level of change and disruption provokes much thought in this one specific megatrend. And the link between that sweeping change in the digital and technological landscapes, the connectivity we now have, if you combine that with our inbuilt hunger for innovation and the considerations of what skills will be required across our future workforces, it's significant. That's something we're already very actively driving here at Wood. We do see this in the opportunity space as much as anything else. including the digitisation of our own solutions, the delivery of exciting projects through augmented and virtual reality, digital twinning of industrial sites and landscapes, and of course, cloud engineering. So lifting our sights beyond the obvious difficulties of today, these mega trends that affect our businesses, they're also the ones that are shaping and continue to shape, disrupt our lives. And that brings me to how, as an organisation, and all businesses for that matter, are impacting the world in which we live, socially, economically, and environmentally. And again, I'm a strong believer that companies of today have must have a compelling and sustainable proposition to society, to employees, to customers, to current and future investors, as well as to our communities in which we live and work locally. We must embrace that change. We must engage broadly and widely and continually challenge ourselves to be a good and sustainable corporate citizen, mindful of the need to always earn what is essentially our license to operate. The COVID pandemic this year is not, of course, something many of us could have anticipated or fully planned for. But I do believe we've got to lift our sights and imagine the world that emerges from this period of profound crisis, challenge and disruption, and start to plan and prepare for it. So above all, it's immediately a health risk with ongoing uncertainty around the timing of a vaccine that not only could be discovered, but tested, manufactured and administered. But it's also, stating, the obvious, a social and economic crisis. And few people are willing to guess how long it will take to put us on the road to recovery, never mind predict, what that recovery period may actually, look like. And as somebody who spent, what feels like a lifetime surrounded by volatility, this is by some distance the most challenging time of my life and career, as it is for, I'm sure, many of us on the call today. And that VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity, it's clearly here to stay. And actually, we need to accept that. So the way we work has changed significantly and will likely do so again and again. It will change our built and natural environment. It will change how we access and use energy, and it will change the infrastructure that forms the foundations of pretty much everything that we need and value. Agility has therefore rarely, in my view, been more important, as is the need to be relevant, and or if I put relevance more crudely, useful. Companies need to be useful, leaders need to be useful, leadership needs to be useful. And that is a real sustainability challenge for us. It would, we feel we've done much to put us in good shape for that uncertain future. However, as a father, first and foremost, I'm acutely mindful of the heavy weight that I have, the weight of responsibility that many of us have this generation, that's borne on our shoulders for the generation coming through. And I do like to think my children's generation's trust is something of an inheritance that we give to the next generation. And I don't just mean a financial one, although I'm sure that's expected of us. I am actually talking about it much more broadly, much more societally. Good quality jobs, exciting opportunities, good living standards, fairness, and a sustainable, built and a natural environment. So in closing, making our business future ready now and sustainable business leadership, I think really do go hand in hand. There's no conflict between them. They're very much overlapping circles with a very similar set of drives around them. I do think courage is important. I think curiosity has never been more important for us, and having that tenacity and resilience to live through these difficult times. But also, making sure we've got the capacity and the ability and the desire to lift our sights and take that longer view, looking to the future and readying ourselves for it now. I think it is about motivating and inspiring people every day and pushing our businesses to perform better, and always being there for those who need a helping hand. And it's about applying no limits to our imagination of what is possible, asking more of ourselves and each other. We've worked hard and continue to work hard to create an inclusive, diverse, supportive culture, but also one where curiosity and positive challenge really are actively encouraged. In doing it and doing it well, we'll put our business in a leadership position, not just in our markets and sectors, but much more broadly across society and the economy, and in the global collective effort to engineer and build a better, more sustainable world. To do this, of course, we must remain profitable. We must continue to generate and attract investment, but it'll be the human characteristics, in my belief, that ultimately define our success. Curiosity, agility, responsiveness, and ingenuity. And actually, I'm particularly thoughtful in times such as these, resilience. I'm proud of the 45,000 curious minds in Wood, the engineers, the consultants, the scientists, the environmentalists, the technical specialists, and our professional support teams, all challenging the status quo, pioneering, exploring, imagining how we can be better tomorrow than we were today. That, in a nutshell, is what leading forward means to me. Thank you.
Fantastic, Robin. Thank you very much for that. I'm just blown away actually by the detail of how you've talked about pivoting a whole organisation in quite a short frame of time. As the world has been pivoting, and the importance to you of the tools and techniques around scenario planning you used in that, as someone who also studied that in the MBA and then went off and trained. It just occurs to me, what kind of advice would you have for maybe some of the smaller companies that are joining today, might not have that academic resource, might not be able to bring in a retired professor, or just a wee word on how you might approach just the notion of scenario planning as something that might be useful for how you think about the world, the environment you're in, and how your business can respond?
Yeah, no, I think it's probably I'm most thoughtful in asking the kind of most fundamental question, Lena. I think is the important thing, and not being scared, whatever the parameters are. If you're a local business and you've got an Edinburgh footprint, for example, and it's being competitive, relevant, and retaining your customer base is your kind of challenge. I think it's articulating it in that manner, and then it is scenario planning for for all the kind of academic kudos behind it. The concept, and I think it's why it's so powerful, is quite a simple concept. Look at the trends and uncertainties that you face, map all the positive ones together, map all the negative ones together, and you create two bookends of what the world could look like, and then try and plan and position yourself between these two bookends. And in very simple terms, yeah, we had the two bookends, but we came up with 4 scenarios. We think that's manageable for us. And actually, on the pandemic, the fundamental scenarios are the same, because the trends and uncertainties are broadly the same. You've just got a pace aspect, a when debate rather than what debate is kind of our discussions this year, and it just changes your emphasis. But I would say to any small business there, whatever your landscape is and however you see your fundamental problem, your problem might be COVID restrictions, or your challenges might be COVID restrictions, it might be a new competitor, it might be a new entrant, you might be expanding. And I think it's framing what that your context around your business is important. And then just doing trends and uncertainties. And if you do that, to be quite candid, you probably narrow the risk and opportunity of your business. And to my mind, that's really the ultimate goal of it, turning risks and threats into, if you do the right things from a strategic perspective, unlocking opportunities and or mitigating the kind of downside.
Really clear and really practical, and I suppose if you do all that, you can then turn that into a story, Robin, can't you? That the whole company can get behind. You can use it as communication. You can tell a story to your customers and all the rest of it. We've had quite a lot of questions in advance of today, and actually you have answered quite a lot of them in your talk already. And on this side here, I'm getting questions coming in. I'll maybe start with one of them in terms of, you know, if I group it into green, the future of green, you talked about green and blue, which is actually very good in Glasgow when you support a certain football team, so I'll not go further than that. What I'm wearing might give you a clue to mine, but what green technologies do you think have the most growth potential, and it might actually offer opportunities for businesses?
I think I'm really optimistic about you know, the fundamental renewable solutions around solar and wind. You know, I do fundamentally believe that is, you know, grabbing, harnessing, and capturing efficiently and effectively the natural energy that's around is key and critical. I do think hydrogen's got good legs on it as well, Lena. I think the transition from, you know, what we call grey hydrogen to pure green hydrogen is one that there's middle steps in there. And again, without getting too technical, if I can put in context, if you take green hydrogen, that really is hydrogen creation by electrolysis. And in carrying out the electrolysis, just now the largest unit that you can create pure green hydrogen, i.e. green energy, providing the electricity to break down water and break out the hydrogen and oxygen molecules. That broadly accounts for a 10 megawatt unit, is the largest available unit in the world. Now, again, I'll keep the numbers quite simple actually. That gives you 2,000 cubes of hydrogen. The steam methane reformers that I'm talking about, what we've designed and installed, is actually what you call grey hydrogen. There is a carbon footprint with it, but to put a scale against it, one of them creates 160,000 cubes of hydrogen. It's 80 times, you know, larger. So in that regard, making it scalable and cost effective and you know, commercially viable is the kind of triangulation that affects green hydrogen use. But we've just completed a study actually with SGN, and it was a pilot project taking green hydrogen, so it's by electrolysis, from wind orientated sources, wind and potentially solar, but green sources, and it would provide hydrogen supplies to 300 homes, and we're looking for a donor site for SGN. Are looking for a donor site for that in Scotland as we speak. So I think like everything else, it'll be the transition, and it'll be a bit of pilots and pilot programs proving things up, and then before you know it, like solar is as cost effective as fossil fuels if your demand for energy is very close to the supply, i.e. for countries with lots of sunshine, it can generate very large solar capability. There's no storage problem because you basically are generating it continually with no disruption, and you're able to consume it as it's generated. That makes it, you know, cost effective. Whereas a decade ago, we would have been talking about it and be saying, well, solar doesn't work without, you know, subsidy. I think the key to unlocking alternatives to solar and wind really is all around carbon capture and storage. You know, any hydrogen move that's not pure green hydrogen is carbon capture of the hydrogen footprint in the current, you know, grey hydrogen, and or carbon capture and storage in itself, where you actually can use fossil fuels, but you capture the hydrogen and carbon dioxide and you re-inject it, you know, into the ground. Again, in the UK, we've got plenty of spare capacity, reservoir capacity to do that.
Indeed, thank you. And actually, we got a specific question about that balance between that, well, blue green or grey green hydrogen. So you answered that. Thanks for that. And sitting on the board of Scottish Power Renewables, you know, myself, and you know, looking at how the cost curve where that is now in terms of that kind of affordability, I think you make some interesting points there. You're obviously a man that's obsessed with evidence and data, always a good point on which I think to make decisions. And on data, we've had a live question actually come in around data, and that's from Luke Hillian. Luke saying, great insight into the enormous amount of data being produced by everything that we do. I think this is a really interesting question. How does Wood as a company fully take advantage of the data it generates, and how does it put it to use to improve its operations? And I know that many of the businesses I'm involved in, first of all, they're not aware of the richness of the data they have, but then what on earth do you do with it all, and how do you do that? So how do you do that in Wood?
I think there's 2 or 3 strands of it, Lena, that I think are important. It is, as you say, the trouble with the generation of data is, to be honest, you can go backwards before you go forward. You just make things more complex, and there's more data around something that actually doesn't enhance your understanding and or the actions that you would take, from it. I think data is our friend rather than our enemy, and if I look at going into 2020, we were already very focused, having done a data mining exercise in 2019 as to what we call the margin improvement program in 2020. That very quickly allowed us to do a couple of things. One, from a data side, we were able to go into what we call rapid intervention. As COVID bit, we were able to actually look at some of the ratios we had. Some were financial ratios, you kind of overhead to revenue, right through that sort of stuff. Some of it actually was utilisation around the deployment of our engineering teams, and actually cross-deploying and redeploying our engineering teams, which was hugely helpful. So I think having the base data there and then being able to flex it was a real key important point for us. More broadly, from a data perspective, actually, again, coming into the year, we got, within 2.5 weeks, we had 40,000 white-collar staff working from home. They're working from home securely from a kind of cyber security perspective. We had a good digital platform, so we were connected across not just our broader functional teams, but also our engineering teams. We were able to do computer-aided design from home, and we were able to do it efficiently and effectively from a productivity perspective. We wouldn't have been able to do that had we not invested in the technology platforms. So funnily enough, the value was the cloud engineering and the data transfer, but actually the smart enabler, if you like, was a technology platform. We'd introduced an Oracle system. We had honed in with Hexagon and 1 or 2 others our engineering applications, so we had minimised the number. We had actually invested quite heavily in cyber security. We had outsourced some of the technical resource that we support requirements to IBM, and all of these things actually came together that made you, much more of a kind of technology fortress, if you like, and we never designed it for a pandemic, but it did allow us to flex very quickly when the pandemic occurred, when the lockdown occurred on the back of the pandemic. And that has saved jobs. There's no doubt at all, us having that technology platform and the usefulness of data transfer and work transfer has absolutely saved jobs in the organisation, which is not the only purpose of the organisation, but is a really key purpose of an organisation like us with such highly valuable, capable and qualified people.
I mean, great, very specific example. I'm just smiling at a funny here, staying on our football analogy. Dave Pearson has just said, "Thank you, Robin. You prompted me to go back and look for the Decision Explorer software I used on my MBA course. I was delighted to see it's still available and he's downloaded it, but he's saying he recalls that a group of 4 students plotting over 100 factors affecting the success of Partick Thistle in 5 minutes." So there's another use of that technology and data. However, onto a serious point, but thanks for that. Mohammed Eldeep is asking, are there any practical tips you have to how do you embed agility in the culture and the DNA of an organisation when you talked about agility?
I mean, I think the only thing I would say to Mohammed is just, be thoughtful on what sort of agility you want to put in. Agility is very good, and you certainly need it from a decision-making perspective. You may be running a business that you cannot afford to have too much optionality, if you like, in the kind of delivery line. So, and we've not always got it right. So sometimes we get more optionality further in the organisation than we would ideally, like, or is good for the outcome of the organisation. So firstly, I think you need to be quite deliberate on what degree of agility you were fundamentally looking at. I think also it's, if you know why you're doing something, you're much more compelled to do it. If you don't know why you're learning the guitar, you'll never learn the guitar. Speaking from personal experience. But if you are motivated and you do know the reason behind it, and it might be, you know, the two bookends of that are, it might be to survive. So you might be realizing, gee whiz, I need to change my business model to survive. If you're a city centre cafe in well, any metropolitan centre in the UK just now, you're probably struggling to survive if this goes on another 6 months from a COVID-19 perspective. So there can be a survival aspect of it. If I look at our business, global though it was, you know, one of the top engineering providers in the oil and gas sector, but you know, the headwinds that we had from 2014 that have not went away from an upstream oil and gas perspective. You know, you're much more on the survival side of the continuum than you were in the thrive side. Conversely, if you know what you need to do to thrive, or you feel you know what you need to do to thrive, you probably need to be agile quickly. So that would be one thing I would say to Mohammed. If it's on the thrive side, be, you know, and one of the issues that it's a thing we always grapple with: fail often, fail early, fail cheaply. We generally are quite a conservative organisation, so getting our teams or senior teams to think about failing is difficult. But if you went to, you know, Silicon Valley, they would say, look, hey, yeah, okay, you're talking Airbnb, but the nine goes at it we had before it took off was a fail often 9, fail quickly, and fail cheaply. That's actually not a bad muscle for the organisation to work. For us to do that, we've introduced a new resource, new partners, and we've got a chief technology officer, because I felt culturally it was something that we were not naturally kind of inclined, you know, to do. So that's maybe another consideration, Lena, that I would offer.
Terrific. Big fan of fail cheaply. I'm
not a big fan of fail, but if you are going to fail cheaply. You know? And
that's the thing, isn't it, Robin? You're not encouraging people to fail, but we're saying that we learn from it. Look, I'm a product of all of that learning, you know, myself, and you know, overnight successes are often paved with many years of failure. Or you know,
no, that's right. And to be honest, and it's that courageous. You know, there's no courage without fear. You know, if you do anything in the military, any books you read in military. And actually, I say that publicly. I say that in town halls. Look, there's no courage without fear. This looks like a big, bold move for us, folks, but we should be worried about this, this, and this, and we are worried about it. And I think that authenticity is really kind of helpful, and it also keeps you quite grounded as to, again, back into the why. You know why you're doing it. I totally agree. None of us get everything right first time.
Indeed. And I've got lots and lots of questions coming in, which I'm super happy to keep asking. But remember, you can raise a hand, and if you want to speak yourself, you can also do that. Staying with culture, got a question from Martin Lofness. Now, I only know one Martin Lofness, actually, and it's my brother-in-law's cousin. So I don't know if it's the same Martin Lofness, but if it is, hello, Martin. But Martin is saying, given the group's history in oil and gas, how difficult was it to bring employees with you when you began to adopt this strategy and, you know, in Martin's view, maybe deprioritised oil and gas? A great question, actually.
Yeah, no, it is always, it's a challenge. It's a challenge actually on two fronts. One is, you know, the shift away from what has been a very healthy sector for us, and actually people have had entire careers, you know, in upstream oil and gas. And also for the new parts of the business, you know, the built environment part of the business, the kind of non-oil and gas, the downstream, the power, the process part of the business. Actually, they're a subordinate group in what was ostensibly an oil and gas business. Funnily enough, it's been such an insightful journey, such a great journey the last 3 years since we acquired Amec Foster Wheeler. And we kind of joke, I've now pulled largely a big chunk of our non-oil and gas business as consultancy, not all of it, but a lot of it is. And we've pulled that together 12 months ago into a single global consultancy. And it's been fascinating. And Joe Zurka is the leader of that business. And I'll always say to Joe, look, Joe, you're in the dining room now. You know, previously you used to sit in the porch when the oil and gas guys were in the dining room. You're in the dining room, you're at the table, and you know, we kind of laugh at it because it's, you know, I remind my board, you know, the Wood Group North Sea business, which many people on the call will recognise, and it's one of the biggest, to my mind, most successful Scottish export stories of the last 30 years. I think Ian Wood's one of the greatest industrialists that we've actually ever had, in Scotland. And our built environment consultancy business is bigger than the Wood Group North Sea business ever was. And that really gets a kind of resonance. It gets a resonance internally, and it gets a resonance, obviously, from an external perspective. I think actually repurposing people is a big part of it as well, Lena. So what we are able to do are engineers, a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer. As oil and gas work has come off, and it has come off, they're actually able to do projects. They're able to do solar projects. They're able to do downstream projects. They're able to be repurposed. Project management. It's quite sector agnostic, to be perfectly honest. And I think that journey and the proof points are, Susan or Brad or Tom or John, who used to be, a kind of upstream oil and gas person, and are now, they're a project manager. And it's one of the reasons, and I feel really quite strongly about how we organise our business. It's one of the reasons we're organised on the basis of our service orientation rather than sector, because I don't want to pigeonhole people that, you're first and foremost a mechanical engineer. If you happen to be doing mechanical engineering in oil and gas, fine, if that's a good market, but actually you're employed by us, you're a mechanical engineer, and you can do work in solar and power and elsewhere. And that's really, over the last 3 years, it's been much more of a liberating, I get it kind of discussion there. The other part is just in comms. I think you touched on it at the start, Lena, but being very clear in communications. I mean, I'm quite open and strategically what we're doing with the business, bridging it into, the right language. Again, scenario analysis is not something that you can present to 300 people and kind of, you'll have some folk nodding off and losing the will to live if you can labour it. But actually we're repositioning because actually energy transition is happening all around us. That's a different proposition, and it's quite an easy sell, I think, organisationally. So in that regard, we feel as if we do quite a good job of that. Just a final point, we've actually connected with our staff over the pandemic. We've got listening group networks that have actually increased in terms of their self-supporting, and that interconnects people across the globe. And I've been hugely impressed with how that's just got its own legs, and we just support and we engage with it from an exec and from a board perspective. But on top of it, we do pulse surveys, and we've honoured that through the downturn. And funnily enough, our net promoter score actually has improved over the summer months to where it was a year ago. So again, it's fascinating, and we don't do everything right. I don't want to present that. But, it's really humbling actually getting people feeding back to us, or staff feeding back to us, that they do feel as supported as you can, etc., with the remote environment. So been encouraged by that as well. Seek it.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised about that. I'm not surprised to see that increase in NPS and engagement as a result of that kind of purpose that you're really leading. I've got to turning now to the external environment. James Foley, James saying, Robin, he was interested in your comments about social impact. And in my own inaugural lecture that kicked off this series, I was talking a lot about what shareholders expect and the kind of social impact of business as well, which Alison Rose also talked about. And he's asking, have Robin and Wood ever investigated the B Corporation movement, and would consider Coutts, which is part of the NatWest Group, as a B Corporation, but actually that kind of more socially accredited, organisation, so like Danone becoming a B Corporation certified, and how much further than that kind of commitment to CSR do you see Wood going, and I suppose into that ESG territory?
No, I think it's a great theme, Lena. So from an ESG perspective, we're really pleased with where we are. We've come out very well from Sustainalytics in terms of our position. I think we're 6th out of 137 companies and ahead of our E&C peers. We've had a 5-year AA rating from an ESG perspective as well. And ESG, so we view ESG quite broadly. we view it in the context of, carbon footprint, direct, and our influence. We actually view it as a green footprint and a green handprint. What are we able to, what services can we provide that improve somebody else's, carbon footprint? So we're quite thoughtful on that from a carbon perspective. We're also one of the founding signatories of a program called Building Responsibly. And that's all around workers' rights, welfare rights in some of the more challenging parts of the world. And on the back of us, making it viral actually with our customers, and one of the big moments we managed to discuss with Shell, them becoming part of it. And now we went from, there was only 5 of us at the start. There's now a workforce of 1 million that's directly affected by building responsibly, which we're hugely proud of. We're also thoughtful on, from a CSR perspective, actually our global theme is education. So that came from our workforce. They felt education was the most important thing. Our Inspire Award winners, we've got an annual Inspire Awards. Our winner last year, collected books, secondhand books, and distributed them in India. One of our Indian members of staff, and I'll tell you, just touching the story. It was he had a Johnny Cash. I don't know if you've heard of Johnny Cash on The Man in Black. He had a black suit, and when he got his award, it was kind of black and white. But it wasn't a pattern. It was just like, it looked as if it was just a white paint on a black suit in effect. And he will not settle until he's affected the lives of over 100,000 kids with books, getting them reading in India. And when he gets to 100,000, he'll have a white suit on. It really kind of resonated with us, and doing some fantastic work there. So education from that level, basic reading and book access to books, right through to, we've got a couple of widening access students at Strathclyde University. We're involved, we touched on it just before the call with Jim about the Royal Academy of Engineering, STEM, gender STEM and the likes. We probably, from an accreditation perspective, we've focused much more on doing the right thing, and a bit less. We signed up to the UN Global Compact, and certainly having Sustainalytics and these sorts of organisations viewing us positively. We haven't really put a great deal of thought, to be quite candid, on an accreditation programme. I think accreditation, Lena, my view, and it'd be interesting yours, from a banking perspective, I think it'll just become the norm moving forward, in the same way that you need international accreditation in terms of your engineering standards and the likes. I think we're going to see over the next 10 years, from ESG in the broadest sense, there will be a framework of accreditation that will attach itself to listed companies, because I think it'll, I just see it as inevitable, and it's a very key part. Green investment. The Bank of England, I'm sure, will be putting pressure on UK banks to make sure that that green agenda, green investment, clean investment is something that's actively, encouraged. Is my own kind of thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I come from a bank where the board compulsory training on the financial risk of climate change, and acknowledgement around that. And I do think for the FTSE 100 into the 350, just that minimum standard of that accreditation, it will start to be regulated. But you can see it with, Larry Fink and BlackRock and the investors, what they're expecting from businesses. Robin, there's quite a grouping of questions. So people like Robert Wiley, and then I'm looking for another one down here, Ahmad, and asking a lot around things like digitisation, innovation, developing strategy. And you've touched on it a bit earlier, but I keep getting questions around it about, the kind of resources that large organisations have to do this, and just hints and tips for smaller companies on how you might go about this kind of thinking. So how you would prioritise digitisation, how you would think about strategy, how you would think about innovation.
I think so. Firstly, my advice would be don't become a magpie. Don't go for the glittery, shiny stuff at the start. That would be one piece of sage advice that I would have, where you really want to come up with the next iPad. Don't try and come up with the next iPad, would be my advice on the journey. I think there's probably, if I looked at the wood journey, there's kind of been probably three fundamental cornerstones of it. I think it's using usefully a digital technology platform that makes your business better managed. So for us, that was Oracle systems and the likes. I think actually when I look at, tradesmen, small businesses, pop-ups, it's actually, do you just miss out banks altogether and go to cube type technology that just gives you the kind of data reader and card reader, and you just innovate and you almost interface with an iPad with an app, job done, because it will reduce your cost base. So I think there's something there with the kind of fundamentals, if you like, the back office stuff, and it's more perspiration than inspiration, but I do think it's really important, because without doing that, any scale up and shift is more difficult, because you end up spending probably a lot more time than you think on hardware, security, and all of these things, particularly if you grow by acquisition, which is one of the challenges that obviously Wood Group has had in the past. I think for me then there's a parallel path of, do you take digital to provide new innovative services and attractive products, or do you take it and say, well, this is what we currently do, can we use technology to do what we currently do better? Can an algorithm do that? Can we get conceptual design done quicker by using game technology rather than conventional computer-aided design technology? These sorts of things. From my perspective, I think the journey into the bright shiny stuff, it's helpful to visit it, and it's helpful to see what's out there. So digital twinning, something that's out there for us, and it really works well with some modern installations with good quality control systems, modern technology, modern field instrumentation, and you can really engage as an engineer remotely and really add value to your customer, because you can do diagnostics at distance, etc. You can get the best experts in the world. And there's lots of projects we do that will have an Australian, Middle Eastern, European and American content to them, and we're able to unlock it. The SGN work that we did, 2/3 of that wasn't done in Scotland, even though it's for Scottish Gas Network, because actually our electrolysis and clean energy guys were in the US, and some of the home distribution was in down south. So I think just be cautious with that, because the bright shiny stuff always looks bright and shiny. And where we are with it is, whilst we run the parallel tracks, we're really focused on our cloud engineering proposition and making sure that we can transfer engineering scope quickly, liberally, and through the right number of applications across the globe. And we see that as there's much more leverage, digital leverage there. It's a bit more perspiration than inspiration, if I'm honest, but it will make us more cost effective. It'll reduce it'll increase our utilization levels, which will reduce our indirect cost base, which will make us win more work. And I see that as more of a priority for us than necessarily, the new iPad type of play. So that would be one piece of advice. I would be deliberate, be very clear what you've got a chief technology officer for. Be very clear if you're trying to fix a problem, what the problem is you're fixing, or if you're trying to create a new service, be very clear in your own mind that there is a market for it. It does need a technology aspect to it, that sort of stuff.
And beware the bright shiny thing.
I do think that is good advice,
Yeah, very good advice. And actually, we had a fascinating discussion on digital twinning with Jackie Ferguson, one of your non-executives, when she was a speaker last year in one of our physical sessions. So that was really fascinating. I fear our time is up now. We've got lots and lots of other comments. I could be accused of loving the sound of my own voice, and I haven't hogged it today. It's just that we didn't get anyone wanting to actually speak live. So I've been the voice of all these questions. I mean, people have asked things about, what about wave? Well, wave, tidal, that's a whole other scenario again. We don't have time to cover everything else. Quite a few Partick Thistle comments, so we've had a bit of a running theme going, but I didn't think I'd fill it with that.
Partick Thistle, though, Lena, that's a safe, neutral place for you and I. So it's
always a safe place to go. Always a safe place to go, absolutely. And then some questions around, the world and, US withdrawing from Paris today. In fact, I maybe ask you just to finish with maybe a very quick question, if you wanted to, He'd heard that wood was active in China, and so this is from Zheng Keji. Would help China to decarbonize their economy through your consulting skills and help China become more sustainable?
I think I'd probably make a couple of comments, actually. So yeah, we've got a Chinese business, and it works very well, within China. Obviously, the three largest contributors to our carbon emissions globally, and they account for around half of it, a bit over half actually, is India, the US, and China. Firstly, I'm quite thoughtful on, we still use steel and cement, concrete. We use a lot of products actually, and I think that's one of the dangers in some of the developed world, that we've shifted our carbon footprint. So whilst we don't manufacture the steel, if we're still using the steel to build the buildings, we're still introducing that carbon footprint to the world. And I say that, no, it's not a UK comment. I just say that you've just got to watch. You don't end up, there's one part of the world working physically with that. I mean, my thoughts are more, can we get alternative materials to very carbon intensive materials like steel girders? Can we build buildings in a different manner? What's the future of carbon fiber? What's the orientation to new polymers that we can have from our petrochemical sector? And I'm quite excited by that. Again, it's technology, it's technologically possible. From a consultancy perspective and doing work in mainland China, there is a lot of barriers to doing work as an international company in mainland China, and there's a big indigenous Chinese market there. We do the sort of engineering that we do in China works well. It's a joint venture, and we do it. It's fairly narrow in terms of its footprint and scope, Lena. So if I did look at our growth areas, it's not to say that Asia Pacific is certainly a growth area for us. They've got infrastructure challenges, they've got growth in terms of their urbanization and population growth, as well as they've got a phenomenal downstream footprint. We've got a very big Asia Pac business, and we have had for a number of years. So it's probably broader than just China, the kind of activity set that we have.